listeners, and welcome back to Edie Extra. Building on the success of Edie's long-standing Sustainability Uncovered podcast series, Edie Extra is the place to find all the in-depth conversations with sustainability professionals about sustainability professionals. Today, we're headed back to the green room, where the Edie team sits down with some of the biggest and long-standing names in corporate sustainability to gain valuable insights and lessons, find out what gets the sustainability professional out of bed each morning, and what trends they see on the horizon. So for this episode, I'm delighted to say I'm joined by Suzanne Lindsay-Walker, who is the Vice President of Sustainability at Novelis. So Suzanne, thank you so much for joining me today. How are you?
I am very well. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks, Matt.
Great stuff. And I suppose a good place to start with, as we all agree, is a little bit about Novelis and your role there. I'm always interested in what the kind of remit of a sustainability professional is, because it's like a snowflake, right? No two remits are alike for a sustainability professional based on the company they're at. So maybe as a bit of an introduction, what is it the kind of Novelis do, and what do you do at Novelis?
So Novelis is a leading aluminum solutions provider. So we are the world's largest aluminum roller and recycler. So we process about 2.3 million metric tons of aluminum on an annual basis. And what that means, so we work in 4 different sectors. So think about the beverage that you drink, the car that you drive, the airplanes that you are flying in, and then also the buildings that you are likely sitting in at the moment. So we serve a lot of different sectors, and aluminum is a part of everyday life. And it's just a really cool place to be at the moment. And I think we're certainly trying to position ourselves as part of the low carbon transition, and aluminum is a wonderful material to do just that. And in my role, I think is kind of unique, and it's very exciting to be a part of sustainability at Novelis. And our business strategy is a sustainability strategy, and I'll talk a little bit about our Vision 3x30. But my role is to drive that strategy for the business, and also from a communications and engagement perspective as well, both internally and externally. And also within my remit is charitable giving and volunteerism for our employees. So it's truly an environmental and social sort of aspects of the business, but also by being in the strategy department, it's driving that core business for Novelis, which I think is exactly why I chose to be at Novelis. And when I made that decision almost 4 years ago, just because it's such a core part of the strategy. Again, it is a sustainability strategy, which is what I've been working for the last 18 years. And I think you were right earlier when you said it depends on what company you're at, and I think what function you're in, right, as to what you do and how you lead.
Yeah, you mentioned that strategy aspect. I think that's really key, and we'll certainly touch on the strategy at Novelis shortly. But you mentioned obviously a kind of career span almost 18 years, and I know you've held up previous sustainability and environmental roles at UPS, at Kroger company, Brambles, PetSmart. So different sectors that have different focus areas, but also different times when perhaps sustainability, certainly at a kind of mainstream level, and those external aspects wasn't quite as broadly understood. And it'd be great to kind of, I suppose, start with a bit of reflection on how those topics and talking points have changed, right? It feels like the traditional challenges when I speak to people in this green room format is that it used to be about getting the board aware. You've spoken about having that kind of strategy input, so that feels like it's already the case. So how have you seen sustainability change over those 18 years?
Oh, in so many ways. So just even before I was in a quote unquote corporate sustainability role, I was an engineer and a civil engineer, and I was trying to build large big box retailers in communities. And it was tough to do, right? And it was there that I learned very quickly that when you can pull together environmental aspects of what would now be called sustainable site design, right? And talking about wetland creation and pervious pavement and conservation easements and things like that. So having this more well-rounded approach, so this true triple bottom line, even when I was, quote unquote, just a civil engineer, that is really where that started for me. And trying to get these, big, large facilities in place was difficult. And it was sort of and it was in Ann Arbor, Michigan, where I tried to do this. And, and I kind of grew up with this sustainable mindset. But when you go and shift it over to PetSmart, it was there that I had this sort of personal passion. And again, that idea of how do you bring that well-rounded approach? And it just kind of grew from an awareness standpoint, as you said. Even at PetSmart, it was more about me asking questions and being curious on how we could drive cost savings and how we could integrate that well-roundedness, if you will, into the different decisions that were made. And, over a course of about 2 years, I then had the opportunity to present to our leadership team, like, what could sustainability look like for PetSmart? And it was really there where it kind of came into sort of the business mindset and trying to drive this well-rounded or this triple bottom line approach. And so it started to me just from asking questions and trying to, at a very ad hoc level, try to integrate. And I think what I've seen over the years is, while there's a bit of that still happens, it evolves, right? And so rather than just saying, what about white reflective roofs, it's how can we drive a better energy strategy or a conservation strategy? And I think kind of capturing the hearts and minds of employees along the way has always been a core component for me, because it can't just be one person. And I think that has shifted and changed. So I now hire people who have sustainability engineering degrees that didn't even exist when I started this. So there's this evolution and knowledge base that has increased. When I was doing part of my master's degree, the case studies had sustainability case studies in there. And it was that I was like, that's amazing. Like the fact that it's sort of now more ubiquitous than ever, but there's still so much more to do. So I think it's just more about evolution. And now that it is becoming, top of mind for boards and perhaps even with some laggards, it's about the future of the business. So you're talking more about resiliency than ever. The real impacts of when you don't pay attention to climate change. And that might look slightly different dependent on the company that you're in. But you have to find, what I've learned over the different roles that I've been in, is you have to find the win-win-win across each of them. And when I was at Kroger, that win-win-win is talking about, food waste was such a big issue. Hunger in the US was such a big issue. How do you bring those things together in a way? And that ended up being the moonshot, Zero Hunger, Zero Waste, where I had the pleasure of helping to build the strategy piece of the zero waste side of things. And that sort of mindset is what has continued to keep me interested and passionate in each of the roles that I've held. But I'll tell you what, Matt, if you would have told me 20 years ago that I would be working for an aluminum company, I probably would have laughed out loud. But I find myself, going farther and farther into the supply chain every time I do something different. So it's getting to the guts of things too, right? How do you drive those change to wherever you are in the supply chain, knowing what that unique value proposition is? So yeah, I don't even know if I answered your question. I just got super excited and passionate about looking back on sort of what I've seen over the years. And again, I think it's an evolution that continues to change.
Yeah, no, you most certainly answered it. I think it's always great to interview sustainability professionals. I feel really privileged to do so because you guys are kind of ever the optimists, even as the kind of window to act shrinks. That excitement and energy always pours through with every conversation I've had, which is great. So thank you for that. And you spoke about the kind of win-win-wins. What do those look like for Novelis then? You're kind of at an interesting point in the supply chain with a really interesting kind of resource that you obviously operate on that's inherently well suited for circularity. And you obviously mentioned the low carbon kind of aspirations around it. So what is the kind of the strategy at Novelis? What is it that you're really trying to achieve?
Yeah, I think that's right. So aluminum is a really unique material. And one of my favorite sort of stats is that 75% of aluminum that has ever been made is still in circulation. And, when you think about true circularity, this material is one. I don't think that everything is destined for a true circular economy, but aluminum in particular is. And I think that's what drew me to this particular role. And what's interesting about it is that not only is it positioned well to be a material of choice, to be an enabler of low carbon transition, if we do it well, fully articulate the value prop of aluminum. And so what I mean by that is we can get the systems in place to bring it back. We keep that high value alloy or product in circulation. And we work in 4 different continents, and it looks slightly different in every single one. So for instance, in Brazil, 100% recycling rate for aluminum. That's amazing. US, 45%. Why? How do we create sort of unique and creative ways to bring aluminum back into the system so that we can create and continue to keep that high value material in flow, which is the first tenet of circular economy, right? Keeping high value materials in flow. And we try and do that in several different ways, whether that's closed loop systems with customers, like think about like automakers. So we work closely with automakers to create a closed loop program so that we can keep the high value alloys within our system so that we can continue to make that same alloy for them, and it keep that value going rather than ending up in landfills. I think it's a just absolute crime that about $1 billion worth of aluminum ends up in landfills in the US. Like, that should change, that should shift. And it's not the case in Brazil where it's 100%. It looks slightly different in Europe. It looks slightly different in Asia where we operate. So it's trying to find the right systems that will enable that material to get back to us so that we can continue to make the products that we make. And that to me is what's really, really unique about aluminum. And I would want to say, well, how do you get better at that? So if I simplify it, if you take a beverage can, for example, it's effectively made up of primary aluminum and secondary aluminum. So virgin aluminum or scrap. And dependent on how much scrap or recycled material that you can get back into a given product, the carbon footprint goes down, which is what our largest manufacturers, beverage manufacturers want. They want to increase the recycled content as much as possible to reduce the CO2 footprint of it. The other side of that, primary or virgin aluminum, it matters where it's coming from and how it's made. So if you're in the US, you get the benefit of receiving fairly low carbon aluminum from primary aluminum from Canada. And that's because it's hydro based. Unfortunately, if it's coal based, or even in some cases natural gas based, then the higher carbon footprint. So we're constantly trying to find that that right mix to ensure that we're continuously reducing that carbon footprint of the products that we're making. And since we went through all of that work, how do you then get it back so that we can continue to do that? So it sounds simple, but it is an extremely difficult process. And it's also trying to find the right closed loop systems that will enable us to try to put that circular economy in place.
It's increasingly apparent that sustainability is a systemic issue. Businesses can get their own house in order as much as possible, but there's so much externality that they're relying on to make change, whether that is the kind of infrastructure, the energy mix, as you mentioned, or just the kind of general appetite to aspect. Obviously, in the UK, we kind of got on a political level some mixed signals from our government in terms of they're taking clean power really seriously, but are going to offer runway expansions for airports, which is also climate. And obviously, there's a lot of ESG upheaval in the US right now, which we won't go into the kind of the details of it. But it'd be, how when there is so much kind of quick fire, rapid change at a policy level like we're experiencing in the US in terms of, climate policy, how easy is it for a business to kind of act and forge long-term strategies around that? What's the appetite to act right now in the US, given that kind of upheaval?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of noise right now, kind of loud noise. And I think what we're trying to do is take a step back and see things as they really are. And what we see is that there's still requests coming in from customers. There's still a desire for our customers to know and understand what the carbon footprint of the products that we sell them are. There's still appetite to enter into closed loop projects. So, despite all of the noise, there's still a genuine desire to move forward on, these different initiatives and projects that happen on the ground. I think what's different is how companies perhaps talk about it in that space because there is so much noise. So I think we mentioned a little bit earlier about, green hushing, sort of this interesting, like we're still doing these things, we just may not be shouting it from the rooftops. And I also think there's an interesting narrative shift. I think narratives win. And so when we're talking about aluminum in the US, it's about the economic impact of aluminum today. It's about throwing away the nearly $1 billion into landfill that I mentioned earlier. It's about, if we went from a 45% to a 90% recycling rate of aluminum, it would create 104,000 jobs. It would double industry wages, and it would generate 1.6 billion in economic activity. When we talk about increasing recycling systems, we're talking about modern recycling systems, not bottle bills. So to me, it's more about a narrative shift. And at the end of the day, what we're doing on a day-to-day basis doesn't change. It just might be how we talk about it externally. And by the way, global companies, we still have to consider there's a big wide world out there, right? There's the rest of the world that still has needs that we need to continue to meet and shape. And so we'll continue to do that despite perhaps some interesting, rhetoric and talk in some parts of the world.
Yeah, that's a really fair point. And I think globally as well, as you mentioned, we've seen a real step change in what's trying to be achieved. And if we look at kind of whether it's COP29 last year, COP16 for biodiversity, we've had the kind of UN Plastics Treaty that hasn't quite been able to kind of get over the line as well. And I know they're reconvening to work on that. There's these big global frameworks that 10 years ago weren't around. I think that's worth remembering as well, right? They have come on a long way in terms of what the Paris Agreement is trying to achieve, what the Kunming Biodiversity Framework is trying to achieve, what the UN Plastics Treaty is. But because this is a global shift, it's quite cumbersome. It can be quite slow. Things can get parked or kicked down the can a little bit. And I know businesses like that certainty, that real signpost that this is directional of travel. So with those frameworks being as slow as they probably need to be to form, does that kind of give businesses a bit of an excuse to take their foot off the pedal, or actually is it kind of the case actually there's a place for businesses to step up and show their appetite and be ahead of the curve when those frameworks eventually do shape up?
I think it's the latter. I think that this is, believe it or not, a sign of progress. What I mean by that is my team, like I probably drive my team nuts because I say this all the time, but simplicity is complexity resolved. And we just happen to be swimming in all of the complexity right now. And at some point, all the advocacy will happen, the yelling and the screaming will happen, the good conversations will happen, and there will be an agreement at some point, right? And there's a natural, and it's happening right now with this, the EU omnibus, we believe that we should be sharing things more transparently, that we should be sharing and disclosing so that people have the same information to make decisions on, comparability, et cetera. It's just that how you do it is the messy and complex part, right? And so I think what we're looking at it is an opportunity to advocate. So, we believe we have a unique material. We believe that we have a unique value proposition and that we want to enable that. And so, we as a company come together and say, okay, what are the key points that we can advocate for? We do believe that there should be transparency and disclosure, but does it have to be at the level that it's at in terms of an economic burden? My team could very quickly just be a reporting group if we let it. And I don't think we still need to get back to the business of actually decarbonizing our business, not just talking about it and disclosing it. So I think there's this interesting thing that happens, and we do have to lean in. We do have to say, yeah, we're willing to share more. We're willing to do it in a transparent, incredible way. But let's think about this in a way that doesn't put us at a disadvantage, and I think that's what the EU, omnibus, for example, is trying to do. Like, how do we strip away some of the things that maybe don't need to be there, at the same time acknowledging that there needs to be a way to have all companies, share their impact. So to me, when I was at Kroger, the thing was, this was 10, 12 years ago, food safety, and there was a million different food safety certifications, and then everybody got together, and it was called the GFSI, and it was through the Consumer Goods Forum that created this GFSI, and now everybody abides by the GFSI. So but you had to go through and wade through all of that complexity before you got to a simple solution, and I think that's what's happening right now in sustainability.
That brings me nicely on to my next question, because I suppose it kind of feels like that the change is constantly happening, but also constantly on the horizon and needed in that sense. How does a sustainability professional, someone like tasked to kind of deliver that change for a company, stay motivated? And that's, I mean, we have, whenever we bring a new reporter on, they usually haven't come from a climate background, and one of the things I constantly have to remind them is like, this will kind of eat away at you. We report on bad news a lot of the time. The IPCC reports the kind of progress not quite being quick enough. It can kind of feel like from the outside looking in that you sustainability professionals are not swimming against the tide, but you're like the tide may have turned, but it's still not quick enough, right? So how do you stay motivated to kind of deliver such systemic change, knowing that progress to date has been globally insufficient and a bit too slow?
Yeah, and that's fair. For me, it's a little bit of the insight and foresight that sustainability professionals, you try to state what's true, but how you message it, you have to find a balance between, the doom and gloom, because you could guilt people into it all day, and that's still not going to help, right? Like, it's certainly not going to motivate somebody else. And so trying to find that balance between being positive. But I think what motivates me in particular is when you actually see the light bulb turn on one of your employees, whether it, or a leader, that they understand the why, and they understand that what they do and the decisions that they make on a day-to-day basis can actually have a significant impact. And so for me, it's finding those things that, what motivates other people, and how do I tap into that to then try and get that light bulb to turn on, like the resiliency aspect of this, like climate change. We have to be talking about adaptation now, right? So let's call things as they really are. And what does that mean for our business? We have 31 plants across the world, and one of them flooded last year. And, that has a significant economic impact. So let's have a real conversation about how do you adapt for the 30 other plants, right? So I think that it depends on who you're talking to. It's knowing the motivations of others. That is what keeps me motivated. And some days it's hard. Some days you don't see the kind of change that you want, but at the same time, that also keeps me motivated that my job's not done yet. I guess it's always trying to find that balance for me. And it's not always easy, and I think that's why having kind of a network of peers, so that you can go and I have a wonderful group of, sustainability professionals, and you kind of commiserate, and you figure out what you can learn from other folks and what you can do, and kind of get that energy that you need to keep fighting that fight.
Do you think your job ever will be done? I think at its core, right, sustainability is about embedding it across the business, into every function, into everything that an organization does, to a point where at some point, and this is very blue sky thinking, I do appreciate that, a sustainability team or function isn't needed because it's so integrated into the organization, right? Do you ever envision that that's something that could happen? Not necessarily for Novelis, just broadly?
It's funny. I remember like an interview that I did when I was, first the director of sustainability at PetSmart. And, one of the things I said at the time was, I want to work myself out of a job, and that's not the case. And the more that you do embed it, the more that you do try to drive the skill sets and the mindsets that are needed, it just morphs and changes. You become a bit of a mentor along the way, and how to evolve what they're doing in procurement, say, or what they're doing, how do they bring along their people. So it just shifts more. At the same time, like the SME aspect of it also increases. So We talk more about life cycle analysis than ever. And not everybody, I have one person, maybe two people out of 13,000 that could do an LCA and do it well, right? And that sits in my team. But at the same time, I'm trying to drive that business integration. There is not one function that our team does not touch in some capacity. So I would love to say that I, work myself out of a job, because believe me, I've been trying for 20 years. But I just don't see it happening. There's an integrity piece. There's a that is always going to be there, and an education piece that I think is always going to be there. A motivation, an engagement, a communication that is always going to be there. It just shifts and changes.
So for a senior sustainability professional like yourself, so any kind of, vice president level, CSO level, whatever you want to look at it, sitting in a company right now, how does their skill set change over the coming years then to account for that kind of integrity and embeddment aspect? How will your personal skill set differ 5 years from now, do you think?
For me, it's about understanding where your business is going and influencing that in the greatest way possible, which was part of the reason why I came to Novelis. I wanted to be a part of the strategy team. I wanted to make sure that I was not a separate than conversation or a sidebar function that wasn't really core to the business. And I think what shifts and changes is that I still have a lot of opportunity to learn the day-to-day operations of our business. So the more I understand and learn about the day-to-day business, the better I'll be at what I do from a sustainability perspective. And I'll tell you, aluminum, and who would have thought would be the most, I swear to God, it's so complex and so fascinating. I still learn something every single day. But for me, on my personal journey, it's about the skill sets and the mindsets of the business, core business, understanding that more intimately than I do today. I will be a better VP of sustainability if I continue to learn and grow in that aspect over time. And the opposite is true. In what I mean by that is, as our procurement leaders learn more and more about sustainability and how they can drive more value for their customer base, or driving that from a supplier-based perspective, they get better, and we just become a better business overall. So I think for me, that's where my head goes with that, is that it's this constant learning journey to continue to get better and be able to do the things that we know we want to do. And that's this, vision that we have at Novelis. No one does it alone. And that sounds so like everybody says that, right? It's got to be collaboration. But and I think as a sustainability professional, I've been saying that from day one, but it's never been more real or critical than it is now. And we're seeing that happen, which is kind of cool. So to me, it's the learning journey, and then how do you truly drive the collaboration that is needed to make some of this stuff happen, because it's about system change. It's not about one aspect anymore. Everything's connected. That's the challenge. That's who I need to be better in 5 years to be able to continue to drive this.
Well, I mean, that's what we usually do with these podcasts, right? It's aimed at giving those insights to keep people learning and connected, even if it's just listening to someone else in kind of similar position or set of shoes. So, Suzanne, thank you so much for your insight today. It's been great to speak to you.
Thank you so much, Matt. You give me a lot to think about too.
Good. That's kind of my job as a journalist as well. So that's good that I can tick that box as well. And for everyone listening, we will be back soon on the ED Extra channel. We'll have more Susty talks, more behind the scenes access to key sustainability projects that are driving the agenda, and another green room booked in rather soon. So be on the lookout for those. You can subscribe to the ED Extra podcast on Spotify, SoundCloud, and you can also subscribe to the Sustainability Uncovered podcast, which is also ours, on those channels as well. So essentially, every month you'll have a plethora of audio content to be on the lookout for. And of course, do check out ed.net for all of our written analysis, daily content on the sustainability agenda, we are definitely trying to help that collaboration piece, connecting businesses up with insight, case studies, and now through our membership offering the chance to network and collaborate and workshop with other businesses. So check that out as well. But until next time, thank you and goodbye.